Welcome to Prediction News Update. I'm Chris Gerlacher with Prediction News, and we've got Pairie here with us today. She's a Stanford Research Fellow over at Free Systems Lab, and she just released some research on how prediction market information is beginning to overtake polling data as the content piece of choice for content creators online when they're talking about politics and some of these other stories. So we're going to start unpacking that and ask some follow-up questions. It's going to be really cool to see how the information ecosystem is beginning to change online a little bit among these content creators. Over at Prediction News, we're also covering the midterm elections. It's easy to find any market you want to find on basically any metric on a political race that you want, but it can be hard to get just a clear picture of what's going on in your state or one area that you care about. Well, Prediction Edge solves that problem. It brings together the market odds, but also candidate information, endorsements, fundraising data, even the latest polling, so you don't have to take any piece of data at face value on its own. So head over to predictionedge.com and give it a sign up after this video. Pairie, I want to get right into how you began to suspect that prediction market content was beginning to overtake polling as the popular way to cover elections and certain news stories.
Yeah, so we saw a lot of political candidates, for example, Trump began tweeting about prediction market odds instead of traditional election polls. We saw Elon Musk amplifying these same prediction market odds and saying that these were the most accurate things that we have to predict election outcomes. At the Free Systems Lab, we're super interested in figuring out the information layer of politics. So we initially looked at what candidates and their supporters were saying. They were mostly tweeting about Kalshi or Polymarket odds. Yeah.
Very cool. And how did polling begin to take a backseat to prediction market content?
We saw that a lot of TikTok and YouTube videos, instead of citing traditional election polls, they started citing prediction market odds instead. We saw that a lot of large news outlets like CNN have established partnerships with Kalshi. Instead of using the traditional election polls, we saw that in smaller creators, even creators outside of the US, they were disseminating like Kalshi odds instead of traditional polls.
Is there a difference in how these content creators may reach for Kalshi instead of Polymarket, or vice versa? Is there a platform preference among these creators in any way?
We did not see that there was any kind of platform difference, but the two that dominated were Kalshi and Polymarket, and there was a small number of videos where people were using Predicted, which is like probably a less known platform. Yeah.
Well, a lot of traders got their start on Predicted, but they're not the big commercial giants of Kalshi and Polymarket either. Let me ask you about what it is about prediction markets that make them so good for online content compared to polls.
I think the big thing is that they're much easier to cite. So they're perfectly designed for the clip economy. They give a creator like a number that's live and visual and emotionally charged and constantly changing, whereas a poll might update every few days or weeks, but a market can move during like a debate instantly. This is much better for content creators, especially since they can put out bigger headlines at a faster rate.
That tracks. How has the clip economy not begun to change, but has changed political coverage online?
Yeah, I think that a lot of smaller creators have started covering political events a lot more, especially creators from outside of the United States, like small creators in places like Nigeria or Peru. We see them covering the presidential election using prediction market odds in a way that's much more understandable. And a lot of people have also begun to trust prediction market odds much more than the way they've trusted election polls in the past, especially in the current political climate.
What is it about prediction markets that makes people trust them more than some of the polls that get released?
Yeah, I don't think it's that they're more accurate per se, but rather the authority comes from something fundamentally different. When you're being asked to trust a poll, you're being asked to trust the institution behind it and their methodology. But the authority of prediction markets comes from something fundamentally different, which is that people are risking their real money. So you think that the price will reflect real information. You're trusting that people's financial incentives make them more likely to be honest, especially in a media environment where institutional trust is at an all-time low. People are much more likely to trust people putting money behind their words.
So there's a combination of a loss of trust in media and just something different, some new incentive for information that prediction markets have really benefited from since 2024 in particular.
Yeah, definitely. The trust in media has gone down significantly. A lot of people don't trust institutions, but they trust people risking their real money.
That makes sense. One of the interesting findings from your research, and I know you published a Substack article about this already, the number of prediction market videos spiked during the 2024 presidential election because, of course, it's the election. The reach remained lower in 2024. The reach of those videos didn't reach quite as far. How is that changing throughout 2025 and 2026?
We see that the reach is definitely increasing because I think during the 2024 election, these prediction markets hadn't partnered with these kinds of institutional media agencies, which is why their reach is much lower. For example, CNN wasn't constantly featuring these kinds of prediction market stats, and it was primarily dominated by much smaller creators. However, that's definitely changed like a dramatic amount now that CNN has a partnership. CNBC has announced a partnership with Kalshi, a multi-year partnership with them. The CNN's chief data analyst Harry Enston now uses prediction market data, and now you see Polymarket odds like everywhere too. So I think the reach has significantly increased. Yeah.
In this mainstream coverage, is it complementing polls or is it beginning to replace polls altogether?
It depends. For example, in CNN, it's complementing polls. They're just integrating Kalshi data into their original programming. But there's definitely some videos where they're totally replacing polls and polls are no longer even cited. Especially in smaller creators, it seems like they're totally replacing polls. But in more large-scale institutional media, it seems to be more of kind of partnership.
Okay. So the large mainstream institutions haven't quite given up on polls altogether yet.
Yeah.
Uh, is there a particular strength that polling still has over prediction markets, or are they just being used as these two different data sources to tell the same story in a mainstream environment?
Mm, I think that there's definitely still some advantages to polls, which is that there's still a lot of more traditional people who are more likely to trust them because their methodology is very transparent. Whereas prediction markets, especially in the smaller kind of elections, are easily subjected to market manipulation. And I think in smaller kinds of elections, polls definitely still have an advantage given that prediction markets may not necessarily have a sufficient amount of liquidity to give any kind of very accurate information. And the accuracy case is much worse for like local state level elections rather than large scale elections.
Hmm. Yeah, I remember covering the Republican Senate primary in Texas. It's Ken Paxton versus John Cornyn, and Ken Paxton had like an 80% something chance to win it all together that night. And John Cornyn pulled it out. He outperformed the polls. He pulled ahead of Ken Paxton. The odds flipped overnight, and now the race is going to a runoff. What is it about these smaller races that prediction markets can struggle to forecast with some of the accuracy they may have in a something like a presidential race where there's more information, more variables to aggregate?
Yeah, I think the fundamental problem is that not enough people are betting on the prediction markets. There's just such a small amount of liquidity. On some of these markets, there's like less than $1 million liquidity. So simply not enough people's beliefs are being aggregated. And like one person making a large bet can skew the markets way more significantly than a presidential election that probably already has millions of bets placed on it. And a lot of people are just less informed, so they're less likely to bet on it unless, like they have maybe some kind of incentive to manipulate, or just maybe they just don't know that much about those markets. Yeah.
Mhm. We're going to come back to elections, but I want to ask, what are some of the other popular events that lead to spikes in prediction market content besides elections?
Yeah, outside of elections, war is a big one. So a lot of people were betting on, I think, the closing of the straits during the Iran war.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people also bet on large sports games. In advance of large
Mhm.
sports games is a big one. I think those are the main ones, but basically large geopolitical events are like the major other one outside of like politics. Yeah.
Mhm. Are these content creators looking for, drawn toward the accuracy in some of these war markets that you can find on Polymarket, or is there a kind of theatrical element that they're more drawn toward for content?
Yeah, it depends. There's some people who are just citing market odds as information, but there's a second group of people who are definitely just using it as like a way to make money. Like they're giving out advice on how to make money. Like for example, they're being like, "Oh, you should definitely like bet on Trump so you can make money." Like a lot of these creators aren't even citing it as like political information. Probably about 20% ish of creators on YouTube and TikTok are actually citing it as like trading advice to gain like more views. Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. So there's a good fifth of content creators in this space who are just trying to become touts.
Yeah, it's a lot of the people who are originally like on crypto, like who are telling you like when to buy and sell crypto. Now they moved on to prediction markets. Yeah, there's like a pipeline on YouTube. Like former crypto creators have moved on to like prediction market and Kalshi. Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. One of the more interesting, not more interesting, but most interesting findings in your research for me, at least in this initial Substack post, you had this short section near the end on when markets can go wrong when they don't work. Tell us about when markets don't work. What were some of the things that break these markets?
Yeah, I think there's lots of things that can break the markets. A big one is definitely the lack of liquidity. Definitely breaks the way how accurate these markets are, which is something I mentioned
Mhm.
before. There's also definitely gonna be
Right.
people who are manipulating the market. So those two things are probably what we believe are the main things that would break the market. Yeah.
Mhm. There's also this quick third thing you mentioned, this issue of possible feedback loops where the price becomes the object that we care about instead of the event underlying it. Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yeah, a lot of these creators in the clip economy only want to be able to like flash out like a quick number, but in doing that, they've forgotten to talk about any of the other things that are behind the scenes, like any kinds of caveats to what they're saying, like whether perhaps the liquidity might be thin or that there might be manipulation. And once journalists and creators start treating a market as news, that coverage can move public attention, which can move the market again, which then just generates more coverage. So in that world, the market is no longer just measuring political reality, but rather it starts to also manufacture the reality it claims to predict. Yeah.
Hmm. So the danger is, making the price itself the news and then, hoping that traders or viewers will move the price itself instead of, looking at
Yeah.
the underlying event itself and learning about the details of the event instead.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it also starts to help manufacture the reality. It starts to predict because, like, when the odds look really good, you gain the candidate gains more attention, which might also make more people vote for the candidate. Yeah.
Mhm. It's interesting, especially with the political markets. There's almost this new generation of ground game. So I think back to 2016 when it was Hillary Clinton versus Donald Trump, and uh, you could look at lawn signs during the primary to see which candidates seem to have momentum. There were liberal voters who stayed home in 2016 during the presidential election because polls had Hillary Clinton so far ahead. Is this just the new generation of an old problem, or are markets posing some new, um, not danger, but kind of new way to trip up in our or in our information environment?
Yeah, I think that prediction markets do pose a new kind of danger, which is manipulation. If a campaign or will or a politically motivated actor can move the market cheaply, they might push the price not to make money, but to create like a headline or like a viral
Mhm.
clip or like a perception of momentum. That's like something that could not happen in the past with polls and like, yeah.
Mm. That tracks. What are some of the ways that a market can protect itself from manipulation or create anti manipulation safeguards so that people covering the markets know that this is a legitimate market, this is a reliable price?
I mean, the first thing is that people definitely need to prevent like insider trading. That's like a huge thing. But on top of
Mhm.
that, there like when people are covering like these kinds of prediction markets, they should make it clear that this is not like 100% accurate, which is how a lot of creators are currently framing it. And there needs to be some kind of standardized and clear rules where platforms encourage liquidity in those markets. Maybe through market making incentives or yeah, or some kind of way to do manipulation resistant prices. I'm not exactly sure what kind of rules that would look like, but I definitely think that's a future topic of exploration.
Mhm. It's interesting. The coverage within mainstream media, just taking the price at face value, you would still want journalists to acknowledge that this is the state of the race now, but you would want them literate enough in the markets to be able to notice whether liquidity is very low or whether there's been one large trade that's just blockily moved the price instead of that kind of smooth line that suggests that many people are trading and arriving at a consensus.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like, currently for polls at least, the journalists are at least mentioning a margin of error or the way that the polling
Mhm.
was being done or what the sample size was, but that doesn't seem to be the case when people are citing like Polymarket or Kalshi odds, but rather
Mhm.
they're just using it as like a headline number without any kind of real caveats.
Right. You also mentioned you want to avoid insider trading. There's a fault line within the prediction market industry between people who want the insiders for the accurate forecast and people who still want to protect confidential information. How should insider trading be prevented to avoid harm to these markets and to the people who trade in them and read them?
I think that the biggest problem with insider trading is definitely bad actors who might have the incentive to manipulate the market price, not even for like a financial reason, but rather to create more kinds of headlines. I'm not
Mm-hmm.
100% sure how exactly to prevent the horrible kinds of insider trading. They're probably distorting the prices, but I think a good start would be that there needs to be more regulations on who counts as an insider and who's allowed to trade, and there needs to be some kind of market resistance to large manipulations. I guess it's not even insider trading if you're not trading for like a financial incentive, but literally just
Mm-hmm.
trading to change the price. Yeah.
Right. You don't want somebody who's just changing the narrative with an enormous
Yeah.
amount of money.
Yeah.
Mm, that tracks. Well, what could the next phase of market use within online content and coverage look like in a more mature prediction market ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that there will be a lot more integration of prediction markets into traditional news outlets. I think that's definitely going to be like what the next step looks like. That instead establish more kinds of establishment media or just blend polls and prediction markets. That's happened to some degree. Like there's the Henry Eaton from CNN has already started to unpack what prediction markets have to say about like Trump's popularity, and I think there'll be people who talk about these prediction markets with more kinds of caveats, the same way we used to talk about polls. I think that looks like probably what the future is. Yeah.
Very cool. And just to wrap, what are some of the future areas of research that you're either working on in this space or would like to explore as we go forward and as the industry continues to boom?
Yeah, I think that our lab is working on figuring out how we can create like manipulation resistant prices in the market ecosystem. I think that's something that the rest of my team is putting out soon. As for other work in like the prediction markets ecosystem, my
Mhm.
next project is working on AI forecasting systems to see how well they can do on prediction markets and seeing what kinds of forecasting systems would do the best. But yeah, that's the main work we have currently ongoing in this space.
Nice. I'm looking forward to seeing it when it comes out. Uh, Perry,
Yeah,
thanks so much for coming on and taking us inside of your research. Where can we follow you and find your work?
you can find me at Pairie K on Twitter, and you can find us on the freesystems.net Substack.
Wonderful. We'll be watching for it. Well, you know where to find her. Here's where you find us. Follow us on X at Prediction News. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, also at Prediction News. And give this video a like so that we can take your support and turn it into more videos. Pairie, thanks again for swinging by.
Yep, thank you so much for having me.